The first time I caught sight of one of America's aircraft carriers, it wasn't in some dusty briefing room or from the cold lines of an intelligence report. No, it was out there on the endless stretch of the Atlantic, where these colossal ships sliced through the waves like giants come to life. Back then, in the early days of the war, we British naval officers thought we understood naval power. Battleships, cruisers, and submarines, that was the heart of the fleet. Aircraft carriers? Well, they were a bit of an oddity, a side act at best. The Royal Navy had a few, sure, but they were small and fragile-looking, more like floating glass houses that needed constant babysitting. We often chuckled at the idea of them being game-changers. That all started to change when whispers and rumors began to trickle back to us in Portsmouth. Submarine captains, fresh from patrols, described gargantuan shapes on the horizon. Ships so vast they seemed part battleship, part airport. My first thought was, blimey, are they building floating cities now? But no one could quite believe it. Intelligence-intercepted signals hinted at something extraordinary, and photos showed decks lined with dozens of planes. But paper couldn't capture the reality. I remember hearing from fellow officers how German U-boat commanders, once the kings of the Atlantic, suddenly found their prey cloaked beneath a shield of constant air patrols, not from distant bases, but from these mobile fortresses at sea. The hunters became the hunted. It was like watching a magic trick. One moment, a convoy was vulnerable. The next, it was guarded by invisible wings of steel. Our old doctrines, built on the idea that submarines could slip through the dark and strike with impunity, were suddenly obsolete. Convoys now had eyes that stretched beyond the horizon and claws sharp enough to tear submarines from the depths. The mood among us was a mix of disbelief and unease. As the war shifted towards the Pacific, our intelligence links with our Japanese allies brought more tales of these floating powerhouses. The Battle of Midway, for instance, was recounted with a mix of admiration and dread. How American carriers projected power across the vast ocean, striking with precision that shattered the myth of invincible capital ships. To us, used to the cramped waters around the British Isles, the idea of naval air power sweeping across the Pacific was almost science fiction. Later, some of our captured officers were even taken aboard American carriers. Their stories sound almost like legends now. Hangar decks that stretched like grand cathedrals, elevators lifting planes as if by magic, crews moving with machine-like precision, and galleys feeding thousands in shifts. Compared to the cramped quarters of our submarines or even our battleships, these carriers resembled entire cities adrift on the waves. The scale was staggering. Our proud battleships like the HMS King George V were massive, but they carried guns and armor, not hundreds of aircraft ready for constant flight operations. These American behemoths were almost as large but devoted entirely to air wings, fuel, and the infrastructure to keep planes flying day and night. One carrier was like several airfields rolled into one, launching wave after wave of sorties. It was a revelation, a naval revolution that made our old ideas look quaint. What truly stunned us was the casualness with which the Americans deployed these giants. While we agonized over every sortie, American carriers seemed to appear everywhere at once, with new, bigger, and better ships rolling out of their shipyards at an industrial pace. It was like watching a factory churning out monsters while we patched up one ship at a time. These floating cities changed the very nature of naval warfare. A fleet protected by a carrier had eyes that could see for miles, claws that could strike from the sky, and a shield that made submarines tremble. For men like me, steeped in the traditions of gunnery duels and stealth attacks, it was like stepping into another world, one where the future was already here. And yet, beneath the awe and shock, a question gnawed at us. Could we ever fight against such overwhelming might? The carriers were more than ships. They were a statement that the war at sea had entered a new age. An age where steel and guns mattered less than wings and flight decks. And as I stood on the deck of my old cruiser, watching the horizon, I knew deep down that the balance of power had shifted, and not in our favor. But what I didn't know then was just how far this transformation would go, and what dark secrets those floating cities hid beneath their gleaming decks. The war was far from over, and the next chapter would reveal that the true battle was not only for the seas but for the very soul of naval warfare itself. The next time I saw one of those American Leviathans, It wasn't from a distance but close enough to feel its presence like a force of nature. I was stationed in Plymouth when word came through that a captured British officer, one of ours, mind you, had been transported aboard an American carrier for interrogation. I managed to get hold of his debriefing, and the details were enough to make any sailor's jaw hit the deck. He described the ship as a floating palace, but not in the gilded, stuffy way you might expect. No, this was a working city humming with life, precision, and a strange kind of rhythm. The flight deck stretched longer than a football pitch, spotless and gleaming, with planes parked in neat rows like soldiers ready for inspection. The crew wore uniforms in bright colors, reds, yellows, blues, each color marking a specific role. It was like a well-rehearsed dance, a ballet of men and machines moving in perfect sync. He told me about the hangar decks, cavernous spaces that swallowed entire submarines with room to spare. Mechanics worked feverishly beneath the wings of dive bombers and fighters, swapping engines and tuning radios as if they were changing tires on a racing car. There were workshops, fuel stores, even medical clinics that put our hospital ships to shame. And the food. Imagine line after line of sailors being served hot, varied meals, fresh vegetables, eggs, even desserts. He joked that he half expected a waiter to come by and ask if he wanted a cup of tea with his pie. I couldn't help but laugh. I suppose they had a jukebox too, and maybe a dance floor where the sailors cut a rug after their shifts? He grinned. You'd be surprised. There was a recreation room where they showed films, a gym to keep the men fit, and even a barber's shop. A place to keep morale high, they said. It's hard to fight when you're hungry, tired, and missing a decent haircut. The contrast with our cramped, cold, and often damp quarters was stark. Our submariners lived like sardines in steel cans, with little more than stale bread and canned stew to keep their spirits up. The idea that the enemy's crew could enjoy such comfort while still being ready to spring into action was infuriating, and, honestly, a little humbling. But what really shook me was the operational side. He described how aircraft were launched and recovered with a speed and precision that seemed almost superhuman. Planes took off one after another, the deck crew coordinating fuel, armaments, and flight paths with military efficiency. They operated like a single organism, each man knowing his role and executing it without hesitation. I thought about our own ships, where orders were shouted down narrow corridors, and every movement felt weighed down by chains of command and bureaucracy. It was as if the Americans had found a secret recipe for turning chaos into order, speed into power. And yet, amid all this, there was an almost casual confidence aboard these carriers, a sense that no storm or enemy attack could break the rhythm. It was a confidence born not just of steel and firepower but of a system designed to endure, adapt, and overwhelm. As I closed the report, a question lingered in my mind. How had we, with all our naval traditions and years of experience, failed to anticipate this transformation? Had we been so blinded by the glory of battleships and U-boats that we missed the true future of naval warfare drifting silently toward us on the horizon? The answer, I feared, was yes, and that realization gnawed at me like a persistent tide, threatening to wash away everything I thought I knew about the sea, war, and survival. But even as the scales fell from my eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that the carriers held more secrets. Secrets that might yet turn the tide again. Secrets hidden beneath their decks, wrapped in steel and shadow, waiting for the right moment to surface. The summer sun was fierce that day when I finally set foot on one of those American carriers, not as a prisoner, but in the uneasy role of observer. The ship lay anchored off the coast of Devonport, a gleaming giant that seemed almost out of place against the familiar gray of the British harbor. I remember the first step onto the flight deck. It was wide and clean, stretching endlessly, the polished steel catching the sunlight like a mirror. The hum of activity was immediate. Men in brightly colored uniforms darting between rows of aircraft, engines revving, radios crackling with orders. The officers greeted me with a polite nod, a mixture of curiosity and professionalism in their eyes. I couldn't help but notice their uniforms. Sharp, crisp, but practical. The aviators wore leather jackets with insignia that told stories of dogfights and daring missions. The flight deck crew sported helmets and goggles, their faces smeared with grease and sweat, yet their movements were smooth, practiced. Walking along the deck, I caught sight of a young woman among the officers, a communications specialist. She wore a fitted navy blue uniform skirt that hugged her hips just enough to draw attention without crossing any lines, paired with polished black pumps that clicked smartly on the metal. Her hair was pulled back in a tidy bun, but a few rebellious strands curled teasingly around her face. There was a sharp intelligence in her eyes, but also a warmth that caught me off guard. She flashed a quick smile as she passed, and I found myself wondering how someone could maintain such poise amid the chaos of war. Inside, the ship was a maze of corridors, but unlike the cramped, gloomy passages I was used to, these were brightly lit and lined with polished wood and gleaming metal. The mess halls were vast, filled with long tables where hundreds of sailors ate together, their chatter a constant buzz. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the aroma of baking bread. It was a comfort I hadn't expected to find on a warship. I was shown the hangar deck, a cavernous space where rows of planes waited silently, their wings folded like resting birds. Mechanics worked tirelessly, their hands steady even under pressure. The scale of the operation was staggering. This was a city in motion, a machine designed for relentless efficiency. One of the captains took me aside and explained the choreography of launching aircraft. "See, it's like clockwork," he said with a grin. "Every man knows his step, and there's no room for mistakes. We launch, recover, refuel, and rearm in a cycle that never ends. It's exhausting, but it's what keeps us alive." I watched as planes roared down the deck, lifting into the sky one after another. The sheer power and noise were overwhelming, like watching a thunderstorm being born before your eyes. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself on the quarterdeck, the vast ocean stretching endlessly around us. The ship's lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere below, laughter and music drifted upward. It struck me then. This wasn't just a weapon of war. It was a community, a floating society built to endure hardship and keep hope alive. But beneath that hope lay a cold truth. The Americans had built not just ships, but entire ecosystems of war, machines that could outlast, outfight, and outproduce anything we had. And as I stared into the darkening sea, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were witnessing the dawn of a new era, one where the old rules no longer applied. Yet, amid all this, a shadow loomed. Whispers among the officers hinted at unexplained incidents, planes disappearing mysteriously, secret missions cloaked in silence, and a hidden cargo that no one dared to speak of openly. What was this secret the carriers held beneath their decks? And how far would they go to protect it? The night wind carried the sound of waves against steel, and I knew that whatever lay ahead, the war at sea had changed forever, and so had we. The next morning, the buzz on board wasn't just about flight operations or drills. It was about a shipment that had arrived under tight security. Whispers floated through the corridors like restless ghosts, and even the usually unflappable crew seemed on edge. The cargo hold had been locked down, guarded by uniformed men with stern faces and eyes that didn't miss a thing. Everyone knew something important was hidden below, but no one was talking. Curiosity got the better of me, and during a rare moment when the deck was quieter, I found myself near the cargo bay entrance. The heavy steel doors were sealed shut, but from beneath, I caught faint sounds, metal clanking, muffled voices, and the unmistakable whir of machinery. It was like listening to the heartbeat of some great beast, pulsing in the ship's belly. Later, I spoke to Lieutenant Andrews, a sharp-eyed officer with a no-nonsense manner. He was reluctant at first, but after a few drinks in the mess hall, the dam broke. "It's something new," he said, voice low. "Not just bombs or planes, but a secret weapon. Something that could change the game entirely." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I pressed him for details, but he only shook his head. "I'm not at liberty to say. Just know that the brass are nervous. They've kept it under wraps for good reason." That night, as the carrier cut through the dark sea, I found myself wandering to the edge of the flight deck. The stars above seemed brighter here, unpolluted by city lights, but down below, the ship was a fortress of shadows and secrets. The ocean whispered promises and threats in equal measure. My thoughts drifted to the crew, the pilots who faced death every time they took off, the mechanics who kept the planes flying despite exhaustion, and the sailors who lived in this floating city, bound together by duty and fear. There was something almost poetic about their resilience, a stubborn flame flickering against the darkness of war. Yet, beneath it all, the mystery of that hidden cargo gnawed at me. What could it be that demanded such secrecy aboard a ship already bristling with power? Was it a new weapon? A piece of technology so advanced it could rewrite naval warfare? Or something altogether darker? As dawn broke, a sudden alarm shattered the quiet. The ship sprang to life in an instant. Red lights flashing, sirens wailing, and men rushing to stations with practiced urgency. Word spread quickly. Unidentified aircraft approaching fast, closing the distance with frightening speed. The carrier's smooth rhythm shattered, replaced by a frenzy of activity. Planes scrambled from the hangars, engines roaring as they climbed into the sky. The deck crews moved with lightning precision, fueling and arming planes as if the ship itself was a living thing fighting for survival. From my vantage point, I watched the horizon where dark shapes emerged. Enemy fighters, no doubt. The battle that followed was a brutal dance of speed and fire, the sky blazing with tracer rounds and explosions. The carrier shook with each near miss, the threat of destruction ever present. Amid the chaos, I caught a glimpse of the communications officer, the young woman from the day before, her face set with determination as she relayed orders, her voice steady despite the storm. There was a fierce beauty in her courage, a reminder that even in war's darkest moments, human spirit could shine. When the last enemy plane was driven off, the ship settled back into its steady pulse, but the tension lingered like a shadow. The attack had been a warning, a signal that the ocean was no longer safe. And the secret cargo below? Whatever it was, it had made the carrier a target. As I stood there, heart pounding, I knew one thing for certain. The war was escalating, and the floating city held more than just planes and men. It held the key to a future none of us could yet grasp. And somewhere deep within, a secret waited to be uncovered, one that could change everything. The aftermath of the attack left the carrier humming with quiet urgency. Repairs were underway, men working in shifts beneath the flight deck, welding and patching hull plates with a determination that bordered on obsession. The air was thick with the smell of oil, sweat, and a faint trace of burnt cordite, a reminder that death had grazed us, but not yet claimed its prize. I wandered down to the mess hall, hoping for a moment's respite from the relentless tension. The room was crowded. Sailors ate in restless clusters, their faces a mix of exhaustion and grim resolve. Amid them was the communications officer I'd noticed before, her navy blue skirt still impeccably pressed, though now stained with smudges of grease. Her black pumps were scuffed but polished, a silent testament to her refusal to let the war dull her sharp edges. She caught my eye and offered a brief, weary smile. There was a flicker of something unspoken in that look, perhaps a shared understanding of the burdens we carried. I wondered about the stories behind those eyes, the sacrifices hidden beneath the uniform. Later, I managed to catch Lieutenant Andrews again. He was pacing near the bridge, his jaw clenched, and the weight of command etched deep into his features. I asked him about the secret cargo once more, sensing that the time to speak had come. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It's experimental," he admitted. "A new kind of weapon, something that could tip the balance. But it's volatile, dangerous even to us. That's why it's locked away, guarded like the crown jewels. If it falls into enemy hands, well, you can imagine." His words sent a chill down my spine. The idea of a weapon so powerful that even those who wielded it feared its consequences was almost too much to grasp. Yet, in this war of machines and men, fear was never far from the surface. That night, the carrier drifted through the dark sea, lights dimmed to avoid detection. I found myself on the flight deck once more, the stars above like cold witnesses to the storm brewing below. The ocean stretched endlessly, a black mirror reflecting the turmoil within the ship. Suddenly, a low rumble vibrated through the hull. Not the usual hum of engines or distant thunder, but something deeper, more ominous. The ship shuddered, and alarms blared again, cutting through the night like a scream. Chaos erupted. Men scrambled to their stations, voices shouting orders over the din. The secret cargo hold had been breached. An explosion rocked the lower decks, sending smoke twisting upward like a dark serpent. Flames licked the steel walls, and the acrid smell of burning chemicals filled the air. Firefighters rushed in, battling the inferno with hoses and determination. But the danger was unlike anything I'd seen before. In the midst of the turmoil, the communications officer appeared at my side, her face pale but resolute. "We need to contain this," she said, voice steady despite the chaos. "If that weapon ignites fully, it could destroy the entire ship." The hours that followed were a blur of heat, smoke, and desperate effort. Men fought not just for their lives, but for the fate of the floating city itself. The secret weapon's power was undeniable and terrifying. As dawn broke over a battered yet still standing carrier, I realized that the war had taken a new, darker turn. The floating cities were not just instruments of battle. They were vaults of secrets and dangers beyond imagination. And somewhere, beneath the smoke and steel, a question burned hotter than any flame. Had we unleashed something that no one could control? The morning light spilled weakly through the smoke-streaked windows as the carrier's crew finally wrestled the fire into submission. The acrid haze still clung to the air like a stubborn fog, and the metallic taste of fear lingered on everyone's tongues. I stood near the edge of the flight deck, watching as men moved with weary urgency, their faces grim but alive with the stubborn spark of survival. The secret weapons hold was now a charred ruin, sealed off by steel bulkheads and guarded round the clock. The captain declared that the incident was under control, but there was an unspoken tension beneath his calm words. Everyone knew the truth. Things had gone dangerously close to disaster. I sought out Lieutenant Andrews once more, finding him in a quiet corner of the bridge, staring out at the endless gray sea with a haunted look. "What exactly was that weapon?" I asked, my voice low. He glanced at me, hesitation flickering in his eyes. "It's a new type of bomb," he said finally, "designed to unleash a blast far beyond anything we've seen. Not just explosive power, but radiation, something that could wipe out entire fleets or coastal cities." For a moment, I felt the weight of those words settle like a stone in my stomach. We had crossed a line, stepping into a realm where war was no longer about guns and planes but about annihilation on an unimaginable scale. The thought was terrifying, but what unsettled me more was the secrecy. No one outside the highest ranks knew the full details, yet the weapon's presence had already changed everything aboard the ship: the atmosphere, the urgency, the quiet glances exchanged in the corridors. Later that day, I found myself in the officers' mess, a rare moment of calm amid the storm. The communications officer was there, nursing a cup of coffee, her uniform still immaculate despite the chaos. She looked up as I approached, and for a fleeting second, her expression softened. "Danger has a way of sharpening focus," she said, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "We all have to keep moving, even when the ground beneath us feels like it's shifting." I nodded, thinking about the countless men who depended on this floating city to keep them alive, unaware of the ticking bomb hidden below decks. As the days passed, the carrier pushed on through the Atlantic, its mission unchanged but its crew forever altered. The secret weapon remained locked away, a sleeping giant beneath the waves, while the ship continued its relentless cycle of launching and recovering planes, guarding convoys, and projecting power. Yet, beneath the surface, the tension simmered. Whispers of sabotage and espionage crept through the ranks, and security tightened until even trusted officers seemed shadowed by suspicion. One evening, as I walked the dimly lit corridors, I overheard a hushed conversation between two sailors. "They say the weapon's not just dangerous, it's been compromised," one whispered. "Someone's trying to sell secrets. We're sitting on a powder keg, and no one knows when it'll go off." A chill ran down my spine. If true, the carrier wasn't just a fortress, it was a target, a prize that enemies would kill to capture or destroy. That night, sleep was elusive. The ocean outside was calm, but inside the ship, A storm was brewing. One that could shatter not only this floating city but the very course of the war. And as I stared out into the black water, one question haunted me. Who among us was the real enemy? The days that followed felt like walking on a razor's edge. The carrier's rhythm continued. Planes launching and landing with mechanical precision. The crew moving like clockwork. But beneath the surface, suspicion grew like a slow poison. Eyes darted nervously in corridors. Whispers curled around corners. And trust became a scarce commodity. One evening, as dusk painted the sky a bruised purple, I found myself in the captain's quarters, summoned unexpectedly. The door swung open to reveal a stern man in his late 40s. His uniform immaculate but his eyes heavy with the weight of command. "Sit down," he said without preamble. "We have reason to believe there's a leak. Someone feeding information about the secret weapon to the enemy." I swallowed hard, the gravity of those words sinking in. "Do you have any suspects?" He shook his head. "Not yet. But this ship is a closed world. Whoever it is, they're one of us." The thought was chilling. A traitor lurking among men who lived and fought side by side, sharing the same dangers and hopes. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any enemy shell. That night, I wandered the flight deck alone, the wind tugging at my coat as the carrier sliced through the Black Sea. The stars were hidden behind a blanket of clouds, and the only light came from the ship's floodlights casting long shadows. I thought about the communications officer, the sharp, confident woman who seemed to hold the entire crew's morale in her hands. Could someone like her be involved? No, it didn't fit. Yet if not her, then who? Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows. A young sailor, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "I need to speak with you," he whispered urgently. We slipped into a quiet corner below deck, away from prying ears. "I've seen things," he said, voice trembling. "Strange meetings in the hangar, packages being passed in secret. There's a group planning something. Something that could endanger us all." My heart pounded. "Have you told your superiors?" He shook his head. "I can't. They don't listen. They think I'm imagining things." I vowed then to get to the bottom of it. If a traitor was on board, their actions could doom us all. Not just the ship, but the entire war effort. Over the next hours, I pieced together fragments of information. Whispers of sabotage near the secret cargo hold, unexplained delays in flight operations, and a crew member caught near restricted areas without proper clearance. The tension came to a head when an explosion rocked the aft section. Smaller than the last but enough to send a ripple of panic through the crew. Emergency teams scrambled, and the captain's voice boomed over the intercom, ordering lockdown and investigation. In the chaos, the communications officer found me. Her eyes were fierce, determined. "We can't let fear tear us apart," she said. "We have to find the truth before it's too late." Together, we began a search, following clues through the labyrinthine corridors and shadowed compartments. And then, just as the first light of dawn broke through the hatchways, we uncovered the unthinkable. A hidden cache of enemy radios and coded messages concealed in a maintenance bay. The betrayal was real, and the enemy was closer than anyone dared imagine. The floating city, with all its power and precision, harbored a secret menace, one that threatened to ignite a catastrophe far greater than any battle. And as the sun rose over the restless sea, I realized the fight was no longer just against an external enemy, but within our own walls. A battle for survival that would test every ounce of courage and trust. The discovery of the hidden radios slammed into the crew like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile calm that had settled over the carrier. The captain wasted no time. Orders were barked through the ship's tannoy, summoning every man and woman to muster. Faces etched with fatigue and fear gathered in the main hangar, a cavernous space now heavy with suspicion. The traitor's identity was a closely guarded secret, but rumors spread like wildfire. Accusations flew, alliances shifted, and even the most steadfast found themselves glancing over their shoulders. It was a poisonous atmosphere, one where trust was in short supply and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The communications officer stood at the center of it all, commanding respect with a calm authority that kept chaos at bay. Her navy blue skirt swayed as she moved purposefully among the crew, her polished black pumps clicking sharply on the steel floor. Her eyes, sharp and piercing, missed nothing. She pulled me aside. "We need to act fast," she said, her voice low but urgent. "If the enemy has a foothold here, they can sabotage the secret weapon or worse." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. We began a thorough search of the ship, questioning crew members, inspecting compartments, and tracing the flow of information. Hours later, a breakthrough. A mechanic stationed near the engine rooms was caught trying to slip away during the night. Under questioning, he broke, revealing a tangled web of contacts and coded messages sent to an enemy agent hidden somewhere on the ship. The revelation sent shockwaves through the carrier. The enemy was not just an abstract force beyond the horizon. It was inside our floating city, moving unseen, striking from within. Security tightened to an almost unbearable degree. Every locker was searched, every message intercepted, and every man and woman watched with new eyes. The ship, once a symbol of strength and unity, now felt like a cage filled with suspicion. Yet amid the tension, the carrier's mission pressed on. Planes continued to take off and land, their engines roaring defiance against the storm of betrayal. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found the communications officer alone on the flight deck. The orange glow lit her face, highlighting the determined set of her jaw and the flicker of exhaustion in her eyes. "We're running out of time," she said quietly. "The secret weapon isn't just a weapon, it's a message. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could change the course of the war." Her words hung heavily in the salty air. I realized then that this was more than a battle for survival, it was a race against time. Just as we prepared for the next phase of our search, the ship's alarms blared once more. This time, the threat was different. A sudden violent tremor shook the carrier, as if something massive had struck beneath the waves. The crew scrambled to their stations, tension snapping to a razor's edge. Had the enemy struck from the depths? Or was the danger still hidden among us, waiting to ignite chaos at the worst possible moment? As the carrier rocked and groaned, I knew that the next hours would decide not just the fate of this floating city, but the future of the war itself. The shudder that ran through the ship was unlike any we'd experienced. A deep, grinding force that seemed to shake the very bones of the carrier. The deck tilted sharply, sending loose equipment clattering and sailors stumbling. The alarms screamed a warning that felt all too real. I grabbed hold of a railing as the ship lurched, the vast ocean pressing in on every side like a living beast. The captain's voice cut through the chaos over the intercom. "All hands, brace for impact. We've been hit." The word hit me harder than the tremor itself. Hit. Not a drill, not a warning, hit. Somewhere beneath the waves, an enemy had found us. The flight deck, usually alive with energy and motion, froze. Pilots clutched their helmets, mechanics swallowed curses, and officers barked orders to maintain order amid the sudden storm. Smoke billowed from the lower decks, mingling with the salty spray that washed over the deck as the sea surged against our battered hull. Fires broke out in several compartments, and the crew sprang into action with practiced urgency, battling flames and shoring up damaged bulkheads. Amid the chaos, I spotted the communications officer moving with fierce determination, issuing orders and coordinating damage control teams. Her skirt, now smudged with soot, clung to her as she navigated the debris-strewn deck, her eyes blazing with resolve. The secret weapons hold was once again a focus of fear. If the fires reached that area, the consequences would be catastrophic. As the crew fought desperately to contain the damage, I made my way toward the bridge. The captain stood at the helm, his face a mask of grim resolve. "We've been torpedoed," he said. "A submarine found us." The realization was chilling. Despite all our security measures, the enemy had penetrated the carrier's defenses. The floating city was vulnerable. Over the next tense hours, we battled not only the physical damage but the invisible threat lurking beneath the waves. Sonar operators strained to detect the lurking submarine, while anti-submarine teams launched depth charges into the dark water, hoping to silence the hunter. Casualties mounted, but the crew's spirit held firm. The carrier was more than steel and engines. It was a symbol, a beacon of resilience in a war that demanded everything. Yet, even as we fought to save the ship, a darker dread gnawed at me. The secret weapon, still sealed in its chamber, was a ticking time bomb. If the damage worsened, if the fires or explosions reached it, the destruction could be total. As night fell, the carrier limped through the waves, battered but alive. The crew gathered in small groups, sharing whispered fears and quiet prayers. I found myself once again beside the communications officer. She looked out over the dark sea, her voice barely a whisper. This war is no longer just about ships and planes. It's about survival, holding on to hope when everything else seems lost. Her words echoed in the cold night air, a fragile promise amid the storm. But as the carrier sailed on, wounded yet unbroken, one question remained unanswered. How many more surprises did the enemy have hidden beneath the waves? And would we be ready when the final storm came? The dawn broke slowly, casting a pale light over the battered carrier as she pressed on through the restless sea. The damage was severe, but the ship's heart still beat strong, a testament to the skill and courage of her crew. Yet, beneath the surface of that resilience, a shadow lingered, darker and heavier than the morning mist. In the quiet moments before the day's chaos resumed, I found myself on the quarterdeck with the communications officer. Her uniform was worn, her once pristine skirt creased and stained, but her gaze was steady and unyielding. There was a fierce beauty in her resolve, a reminder that even in the face of destruction, humanity endured. "We've survived the worst," she said softly. "But this war isn't over. The secret weapon, it's still here, locked away. And I fear it's only a matter of time before it decides our fate." Her words weighed on me like a prophecy. We had seen the future of naval warfare, a future forged in fire, secrecy, and shadows. The floating city was both a fortress and a powder keg, a symbol of hope and a harbinger of devastation. As planes lifted off once more, their engines roaring defiance into the sky, I knew that the battle was far from over. The enemy was relentless, the dangers lurking beneath the waves and within our own ranks more insidious than ever. And then, as the carrier sailed toward uncertain horizons, a sudden, chilling transmission crackled over the radio, an intercepted message in a code we had yet to decipher. The words were fragmented but clear enough to send a ripple of dread through the command. "They're coming. The final wave. No turning back." The carrier's crew exchanged glances, the weight of those words settling over us like a storm cloud. The war at sea had reached a tipping point, and the floating city was at the heart of it all. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ocean blood-red, I realized that the true battle was only beginning. The secrets we guarded, the sacrifices we made, and the courage we summoned would be tested like never before. And somewhere, deep within the carrier's steel ribs, the secret weapon waited, its silence more terrifying than any gunfire. The question now was not if, but when. The sea was about to witness a reckoning, and we would be the ones to face it. The floating city sailed onward into the unknown, carrying with it the hopes, fears, and destiny of a world at war. And in that uncertain darkness, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again.